Hello, and thank you for joining us for another episode of Ask a Historian. I'm Matthew Wilkinson, historian with Heritage Mississauga. Join us each and every week as we explore stories of the city of Mississauga together. And please send in your questions, and we'll have fun digging into the past and exploring some of those things that make Mississauga very unique. Like, subscribe, and follow us, and stay up to date with Heritage Mississauga on all our heritage happenings. For those joining us this week, first and foremost, happy St. Patrick's Day. And we will explore some of our stories here on the landscape, some in plain sight, some hidden hidden in time, of some early Irish connections here in the city of Mississauga. So we're going to jump right into a community which has largely disappeared on our landscape, but there are some remnants that survive that remind us of its past. If you've ever traveled up Ninth Line, north of Britannia Road, you'll find a small parish church, formerly known as St. Peter's Roman Catholic Mission Church, and adjacent to it a small early settler cemetery. And this is one of the last remnants of a historic community that was known as Diamond, although in local newspapers they referred to it as the Catholic Swamp. In our research into what we call the lost villages of Mississauga, it's apparent that not every lost community was in a sense a village. Some communities were loosely connected farming families with daily life focused around a local rural church or a school or a general store and so on. The Catholic Swamp, as it was again known in newspapers like the Streetsville Review, was one such rural community in what is today Mississauga. The Catholic Swamp, or Diamond as it was officially known, was originally part of Trafalgar Township in Halton County and roughly situated in the area along Ninth Line, in and around the intersection of Britannia Road. This area is now part of the city of Mississauga, but although its earlier history connects more strongly with the communities of Milton and Hornby in neighboring Halton. The Catholic Swamp was so named by the Protestant-leaning Streetsville Review newspaper in reference to many Irish Catholic families who settled here in the 1820s and 1830s. We often look at early Irish immigration and connect it to the potato famine, but there were earlier waves of immigration here in historic Mississauga, and this is one example there where a lot of the early settlers in this community were Irish and came in the years before the Irish potato famine. Among the early families who settled in this area were the McCarrans, who arrived about 1822. Stories recollect that the area was once covered by swamp and oak trees. Trees were felled and dragged to the nearest sawmill in Hornby. The McCarrans, like many of the other early farming families, eked out what they could on the land, beginning with wheat and moving on to various forms of mixed farming. McCarran family memory, we had an opportunity to meet with some McCarran family descendants several years ago, recalls the fields flooding in the winter and freezing and children skating across the farm fields in wintertime. Memory also recollects traveling to their school at McCurdy's Corners, which was referred to as the 10th Line School, and the general store, which went by the name of California. You talk about dreaming perhaps of other places, or there were even social dances at another nearby community called Schneider's Corners. Among the early settlers in this area were also the Noonan family. William Noonan had emigrated from Pennsylvania, although the family had originally come from County Cork, Ireland. The Noonans traveled to Upper Canada along with the Cook, Skelly, and O'Donoghue families. After arriving in Upper Canada in the late 1820s, William Noonan purchased a farm here from Daniel Highland in 1854, what is today the northwest corner of Britannia Road and Ninth Line. By the time the Noonans had arrived, the area had already attracted a large number of Irish Catholic settlers. As the name Diamond faded from use, the community was also referred to in the early 20th century as Noonan's Corners. The surviving church, which remains today along Ninth Line, as well as the cemetery, was again originally known as St. Peter's Roman Catholic Mission Church, and it was built on land that was donated to the early congregation by Daniel Highland. The church had become, or became in time, a focal point of daily life. The congregation itself was first organized in 1819 by Bartholomew O'Connor and Charles O'Hara. They were brother-in-laws. The first mass was held in O'Hara's log cabin by Father O'Reilly, and there is a legend, if you will, that talks about Charles O'Hara and Bartholomew O'Connor walking to Hamilton to convince Father O'Reilly to come out to this fledgling community to celebrate their first mass. In 1823, a log chapel was built, and the chapel was replaced by a frame church in 1850. The church itself that survives today is a remnant of the frame church, which was enlarged and bricked in 1882, and then subsequently moved back from Ninth Line, so that the front wall of the church today sits on what was originally the rear wall of the building before it had been moved back for the widening of the road. The Noonan family became involved in the congregation when they came to the area. Members of the McCarran and Noonan families, as well as many other Irish Catholic settlers, can be found in the adjacent early settler cemetery. Some of the names, some of the family names associated with the area include the Carney, May, Mason, McCarran, McGregor, Miller, Noonan, O'Hara, O'Connor, Orr, and amongst many others. And I do highly recommend just a quiet walk through that cemetery too. Truly historic in our community, and there are many stories associated to some of the early families that are buried in that cemetery. The graveyard itself, at least in my sense or my mind, remains a quiet testimony to those who worked so hard on what was literally both the geographic or physical and social periphery of two townships. The Catholic Swamp, or Diamond, was really a kind of on the outskirts of Peel and Halton counties, straddled along the border, and the farmland wasn't great, hence the name the Swamp. And still they endured. And some of them prospered and went on to have multiple generations living on the property. Descendants of these early families still reside in a wider area. Truly, the Catholic Swamp, a diamond in the rough, again, stretched along the periphery of two townships. Our next story, another village that has, again, largely disappeared on our landscape today, is that of Pucky Huddle. And it's sometimes, I always say, if you say Pucky Huddle, it's hard not to smile a little bit. Again, Mississauga is home to many lost villages, places that have disappeared long before the city came to be. You can look at old maps and you get the post office names and like, and when there's a post office, there's people that identify with living in that community. And Pucky Huddle was one such place. A crossroads hamlet, Pucky Huddle was located around the modern intersection of what is Tompkin Road and Burnthorpe Roads today. Over time, a variety of different spellings were used for the community. Pucky Huddle, Pucky's Huddle, Pucky Fuddle, Puggy Huddle, Puddle Huddle, amongst other names. But Pucky Huddle is the one that comes down the strongest or the most prevalent in history. One possible meaning for the name is that Pucky is derived from an Irish phrase puck, which means to hit or strike, emphasizing perhaps that Pucky Huddle was a rough and tumble locale. Other meanings may refer to the muddy state of early roads in the community. The small community centered around John Galice's Pucky Huddle Tavern. The tavern was named first, and then the community takes its name from the tavern. The tavern catered to Irish Catholic patrons, and later proprietors included John Parks and Patsy Herbert. We have no pictures of the tavern. It reportedly burned down in the 1880s, but we do have reference in the William Perkins Bull collection to the funeral of Patsy Herbert, and the map shows a stop at Pucky Huddle Tavern. For many early settlers, the Pucky Huddle Tavern was synonymous with vice. One reference tells of intoxicated farmers journey home from Pucky Huddle one night, full of bad whiskey, ill temper, and good fellowship. Now, there's perhaps a slogan from our past that we can hang a hat on. Full of bad whiskey, ill temper, and good fellowship. I like the good fellowship part. While alcohol may have played a large role in Pucky Huddle's less than savory reputation, it was not the only reason that local residents might have objected to not only the kind of the community, but the tavern itself. Pucky Huddle Tavern was also apparently a famous venue for cockfighting and dogfighting. Again, we probably frown on those activities today, certainly. Gossip often ran rampant in Puckey Huddle, as in one issue from 1899 of the Streetsville Review illustrates. Billy Hawkins said that Withers told him that someone else told him that Jack Tolman said if Puckey Huddle did not get a tavern license this spring, there would be a row. Well, there's a he said gossip that ended up in the newspaper. Puckey Huddle was also home to George Tolman's Brickyard and Patrick Cosgrave's Brewery. One of one of my favorite articles that I've ever explored here at Heritage Mississauga involves Patrick Cosgrave's Brewery, and more specifically, a connection to events many years down the road. When the Japanese assigned their instrument of surrender following the Second World War, Canada's representative there was a Colonel Cosgrave, and he was the grandson of Patrick Cosgrave, who had started a brewery at Puckey Huddle, Ontario. And so just the neat links that pop through in history of these family lines that spread beyond our borders that can be traced back here to local connections. Today, Puckey Huddle truly is a vague memory. There's not much left to mark its existence. The Puckey Huddle Tavern was said to burn down. We have a reference to an 1888 fire, but also perhaps also a reference to a 1915 fire, which might suggest that it was either repaired or replaced after the first one, but then burned down again. Although no record of the actual fires have been found, nor do we have any pictures of it. One of the few references to Puckey Huddle in newspapers is found in the Toronto Star in 1941, lamenting the disappearance of the community and its name and wondering what its story might have been. And so we've highlighted a bit of the story, but to be honest, we don't know a lot of it. But it is very much the story of Puckey Huddle is very much connected to early Irish settlers in our community. It was considered to be an Irish community that drew a lot of Irish Catholic and Protestant to the tavern. Hence, there might be one of the reasons being such a rough and tumble locale, but very significant part of an early settlement landscape. That was a name that our forebears in the city certainly would have connected to. I even remember growing up with my great uncle Jeff, Jeffrey Adamson, and he referred to Puckey Huddle in memory as well. So the name Puckey Huddle remained on the landscape into the 1950s and beyond as just kind of a reference point, if you will. But again, the name and the landscape and all evidence of the Crossroads hamlet have disappeared. From there, we'll go to kind of our last chapter of our story that we'll explore today, and that is another lost village, and this being the village of Elmbank. If you've ever stood at the in the terminal of Pearson International Airport and staring out at the vast tarmac, I do wonder if I always think when I'm at places like that to wonder what the landscape used to be like, or you know, what landmarks might have been there and removed for the airport. The airport covers such a vast geography today that you kind of wonder what might have been in place before. Sometimes it's hard to kind of peel back the layers of the onion, if you will, and look underneath the landscape to see kind of what is remembered on the landscape. After all, airport construction only began in the late 1930s, and people lived on this land in this area for generations before that. Have you ever noticed also on the landscape that Britannia Road abruptly halts once it reaches the airport grounds? Of course, historically, it didn't do that. So if you're ever curious, I wonder if you've ever wondered where Britannia Road used to go. In our not too distant past, before Malton Airport was even conceived, the intersection of Britannia Road and Fifth Line marked the little community of Elmbank. The intersection is gone today. You can't even find where Elmbank used to stand because of the airport expansion over time. The land in the immediate vicinity around what became Elmbank had begun to be cleared in the early 1820s. A little more than a rural crossroads farming hamlet, Elmbank developed some traditional early settler businesses: a corner store, a post office, a school, a blacksmith, a carriage maker, and one of our famed businesses historically here, the cheese factory. So Elmbank was home to a cheese factory for a period of time. The post office operated between 1873 and 1915. Elmbank never acquired more substantial industries like places like Streetsville and Meadowville did, such as mills. And as a result, it remained a kind of a small rural crossroads hamlet. But what marked Elmbank as a center of importance within early Mississauga was the Catholic mission and cemetery. Prior to the construction of St. Patrick's Roman Catholic Church in Dixie and St. Mary's Star of the Sea Church in Port Credit, and of course there was also St. Joseph's in Streetsville and St. Peter's on Ninth Line, Catholic parishioners from historic Mississauga would and beyond would travel to Elmbank for mass, baptism, marriage, and burial. The little church, rectory, and cemetery were located on a slight distance north of Britannia Road in the Fifth Line intersection. The church was known by various names over its 100 years of existence. The Fifth Line Church, St. Bernard's, St. Kevin's, Church of the Sacred Heart, amongst others. The missionary priest, Reverend Edward Gordon, who was based out of St. Paul's Church in Toronto, led the Catholic mission at Elmbank in its early years. Under the direction of Reverend Gordon, a small wooden church was constructed in 1833, the same year that the first recorded burial that took place in the adjacent Catholic cemetery. This original log church was replaced in 1885 by a red brick church, which in turn was torn down in 1932. The cemetery grew to contain over 300 burials. For its first 60 years, the Elmbank Catholic Mission was vibrant with 400 people reported to attend Mass regularly, with its parishioners coming from as far away as Port Credit, Bolton, and Toronto. The hamlet of Elmbank also contained Robert Spear's blacksmith shop, William McKay's store and cheese factory, and Saveston's carriage factory on the southwest corner of the intersection, an inn on the northeast corner, and a schoolhouse on the northwest side. We have a few pictures of some of these. A short distance south on Fifth Line was also the Bethany Wesleyan Methodist Church and Cemetery. And a little to the west on Britannia Road, again, was that cheese factory on William McKay's property. The Bethany Church was originally built as Shell's Chapel in 1831 and replaced with a permanent brick structure in 1862. It was torn down in 1956 due to the diminishing congregation and airport expansion. The Methodist Cemetery was exhumed and relocated to the Riverside Cemetery in Toronto. The last vestiges of Elmbank began to disappear in the 1930s and 1950s, with the expropriation of rural land and the expansion of the Malton Airport. For a time, the only reminder of Elmbank was a lonely Catholic cemetery isolated on the tarmac alongside a runway at Pearson International Airport. In 2001, the cemetery was relocated to Assumption Cemetery in Mississauga, and with that, all the visible reminders of Elmbank are gone. Well, kind of. If you look on the landscape, you'll find a few things that remain. If we look closely at a road map of the airport grounds, we can find Elmbank Road, and many of the materials, stained glass windows, pews, and bricks from the Elmbank Catholic Church were reused in neighboring churches. So even though the crossroads themselves have disappeared, Elmbank in part lives on. And I do invite you to visit Assumption Cemetery. And at the back of Assumption Cemetery, you will find a memorial cairn with historic gravestones scattered around it. And that is the relocated Elmbank Cemetery that is now the remains rest at Assumption Cemetery here in Mississauga. So that brings us to a close in our exploration of kind of early connections to Irish settlement on our landscape. There are certainly many other stories to explore. Many people of different cultures helped to shape the city, and certainly those of Irish ancestry were part and parcel with the formative years of our city. Their marks, the marks they left on this community, are all around us today. A number of place names and road names carry Irish connections to them. We can look at the story of Dixie Road being named after Dr. Beaumont Wilson Bowen Dixie, who was of Welsh ancestry, but the community itself, before being named Dixie, was known as a variety of names, including Sydenham, Fonthill, Fountain Hill, Corktown, and Irish Town, amongst others, and the latter two referring to, of course, many early Irish roots, if you will. Of course, we have a number of early Irish congregations, churches in our community, and all of them have fascinating histories with the people who helped shape them and guide their progress over time. And some of them remain some of those historic congregations remain very much a vibrant part of our city to this day. So there's lots to connect to with all things Irish, but First and foremost, happy St. Patrick's Day. Wishing everyone all the best as we explore the green, the orange, and for those kind of truly connecting to the story, the blue of Irish connections here in Mississauga and through our look back at historic Mississauga. So once again, thank you for joining us with Ask a Historian. We look forward to sharing the stories of Mississauga's past with you each and every week here on our program. Please send in your questions and be part of the program as we explore the fascinating stories of the city of Mississauga. Like, subscribe, and follow us and stay up to date on all the heritage happenings with Heritage Mississauga. And we will see you next week here on Ask a Historian.